Hey, Dr. Kraus again, and just a little intro. I'm at the campus of Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in Boston again this morning, but want to give you a little idea of what's coming. We're going to look at chapter 17 and 18 and see some people we've seen before, the beast and the lamb, and chapter 18, we're going to get a lot more into this, the great prostitute of Babylon, and that's the focus of chapter 18, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but I hope you enjoy this video. So to keep us in mind of where we are, we're almost at the end of it. We're in this big middle section about the judgments of God. And this section, 17 through 19, about the whore of Babylon or the prostitute of Babylon. In this video, we're going to look at chapters 17 and 18, so we'll wait till the next video for chapter 19. And I'm not going to read this one. I would really encourage you, just for the sake of time, I'd really encourage you to sit down and read again chapter 17 and 18, maybe even stop the video and read them right now to give you some context. So what we see here is what some people would call a new vision cycle. We looked at this way long time ago, that when he says something about being in the spirit, that it's like a new vision begins. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and there I saw a woman. So in these chapters, we find many fabulous, fantastic images. So they're kind of what we're getting now is interpretation of previous symbols given earlier in the book. So I think as much as we can, we should seek the message behind them as well as the historical circumstances that are being addressed here in the book of Revelation. So let's look at these a little bit. A chart of parallel images, for lack of a better way of putting this. In Revelation 17, it mentions having symbolic names. Well, that's not a new thing. I mean, way back chapter 2, a new name given, or the mark or the name or the number of the beast in chapter 13. And the rider on the white horse, we'll see later in chapter 19, is the name, the Word of God, or the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So this idea of symbolic names is very prominent in Revelation. The idea of a sign on the forehead in chapter 17 here. Well, we saw clear back in chapter 7, the servants of God sealed on their foreheads, again in chapter 9. And the Lamb, or the Father's, or God's name on the forehead in the appearance of the Lamb in chapter 14. We'll see that again later at the very end of the book, chapter 22. But also, as we've seen several times, the mark of the beast on the forehead. And really, just this whole thing of the beast. I haven't said too much about this so far. In Greek, therion, it occurs 9 times. That word occurs 9 times in chapter 17. And you see the parallel here between the dragon, or called the serpent, or Satan, or the devil, especially in chapter 12. Scarlet, red, same basic colors, 7 heads, 10 horns. And it says that the beast of chapter 13, going back, 7 heads, 10 horns. But in chapter 17, those not in the book of life, thaumazo is the verb here, they marveled at the beast. And in chapter 13, that the beast was worshipped by those not in the book. Just another real quick one, the blood of the martyrs, or of the saints. And here it says the harlot is avenged for the blood of God's slaves. We're going to see this especially in chapter 19 at the end of all of this. So this is ahead, but a lot of places where this sort of imagery, the blood of the martyrs, the killing of those people who die for their faith. So the concentration of these images in Revelation 17 shows this is really a high point for one of the major themes, if not the major theme of the book, and that is the conflict between God's kingdom and the evil empire of the world, personified sort of here, or exemplified by Rome. But I think, the picture is bigger than just Rome. This is a sort of a historical way of understanding everything. So you get this picture of the great whore and the beast. And I want to say a little bit about this great whore, the whore of the prostitute of Babylon, prostitute, harlot, all of these are the same word, same idea. And I want to say in Greek, of the whore of Babylon is not it's what we call in Greek exegetical. It's like the city of Chicago, the whore of Babylon. The city is Chicago, the whore is Babylon. That's the intent of the language here. So what do we see? Well, we get this image of a sexually impure woman, one that we've already seen this image before in the letter, the greetings to the churches with Jezebel. And here she seems to be a symbol for the defeated forces who oppose God. We saw that a little bit in chapter 14, but we're going to see that big time in chapters 18 and then in 19. I want to show you just some images that have been created to portray this, the great whore of Babylon. And I always have respect for people who even try to do this because I'm not very artistic. So here's a kind of a crude one. Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth, and so kind of a almost childish drawing of writing on this beast image. Here's one that's a little more sophisticated, a little bit more modern, although I think this is from the 1950s, but looking like a sophisticated woman with a pitcher of blood, and you don't really see the beast very much here, pictured like a dinosaur, I guess, Triceratops. An older one out in the forest, kind of taking the beast for a stroll, I guess. And I love this one. I mean, I'm not going to go into explanation. You could stop the video and look at these if you want to, but this is the kind of thing that you find a lot where somebody's like, oh, well, the image for Starbucks is actually the Great Whore of Babylon. Starbucks is taking over the world, and here you find all the prophecies being fulfilled. William Blake, that several of you chose as your picture at the beginning of the class, tries so hard. I mean, he's got a very distinct style, but his image of the Whore of Babylon is probably my favorite one. So what about this person, the harlot? Well, it says that she represents cities, and we see this in the Old Testament in books like Nahum and Isaiah. And the idea they are unfaithful cities. If you're a harlot, if you're a prostitute, you are given over to idolatry and not to God. And so when it says seated on many waters, this is going to be explained a little bit later, but we see this kind of image in the prophets too, in Jeremiah. And then Babylon itself, what's the big deal here for me is what is the significance of the name of mystery? And what does it stand for? We see Babylon elsewhere, certainly in the Old Testament, going all the way back to the Tower of Babel. That's where the idea of Babylon comes from, and the time of confusion, but condemned in prophets like Jeremiah. You even see Babylon mentioned in 1 Peter, where he says he's probably in Rome, and he says that he's writing from Babylon. Those of Babylon greet you. And we'll come back to that mysterious name. But you see also this image of the kings of the earth. So what is the relationship of these kings to the great whore of Babylon? And who is the true ruler of the kings of the earth? This is part of the stuff that we're going to try to uncover in the chapter. So in verse 5, John relates that on the whore's forehead is a onomagrammaton, a name written, Musterion, Babylon he megale. You see that last word, megale, mega, the big, the Babylon the Great. A name has been written, a mystery, Babylon the Great. And the question, is the mystery a descriptor for the name? In other words, a name, a mystery, this is the way it's sometimes translated, or is it meaning a cryptic name, a hidden name? And you see this in some of the translations. So is mystery the first word in her title? Here's her name, the big title. She is Mystery, Babylon the Great. That's the way kind of the NIV translates it. But probably the first makes more sense. It's in keeping with what he's going to say later in verse 7. The mystery is explained. Thus, calling the name Babylon a mystery is a clue that literal Babylon is not included. I think that's what's going on here. He wants you to know this is talking about Babylon in the Middle East. It's talking about something else. So the traditional understanding is that this is Imperial Rome of John's time, and we'll say a little bit more about that. But pseudonyms for Rome in this period are found in other Jewish writings. I'm just giving you one example here in 4th Ezra, about the same period as the book of Revelation, another apocalyptic book, but doesn't make it into the Bible. But he says, "Woe be to thee, Babylon and Asia. Woe be unto thee, Egypt and Syria. Gird up yourselves with socks, with cloths of sack and hair. Bewail your children. Be sorry, for your destruction is at hand." Well, he's not concerned at all about Babylon in the Middle East. He's talking about Rome there. All of these seem to have the same reason. Rome, like earlier Babylon, was responsible for destroying the Jerusalem temple, which is in the rearview mirror for John, had happened probably 20 plus years earlier. And this is a artist's reconstruction of ancient Rome at maybe about the time of the writing of the book of Revelation. You can see in the upper left there the Colosseum, which was not completed at the time that Paul and Peter were in the city of Rome. It was in the 70s. And then the giant hippodrome over to the right, where they held the chariot races. It's estimated that it held maybe 300,000 or 400,000 people. I mean, it's gigantic, bigger than any stadiums we have today. Down in the corner there on the left, the big theater that they had to do certain things. So this was a magnificent city. Why would Rome be pictured, though, as seated on many waters? Well, the city of Babylon was. I mean, it was kind of built over a river. Here it's built beside the Tiber River, but it doesn't feel like it's seated on the river. But in verse 15, it tells us that the waters are peoples. Babylon, Rome, has control over lots of people. And this idea of whore, or also mentioned here, blasphemous names, fits into a biblical perspective that when idolatry is considered, and especially the idolatry of ancient Rome, this is the right title. So this includes the imperial cult, where they're called to worship Domitian, but remember, they also worshipped a goddess called Roma, the goddess of the city, the patron goddess, and you found temples to Roma all over the empire. So all of the people on earth, it says, in kind of this inclusive statement that then there's some exceptions to, they've drunk of her whore wine. You see this in chapter 18 especially. And I think that probably the whore wine refers to the bloodshed of the many military conquests. Wine is pictured as blood here in chapter 17, so maybe a way of describing the persecution of God's people. So she is arrogant in her luxury, and she is contrasted with the lamb very kind of briefly in this chapter. But the lamb stands in marked contrast to the whore of Babylon and really to the beast in this chapter. Their war with the lamb is alluded to here, but the point is in chapter 17, and really why the lamb comes into play, is the lamb will conquer. So notice how the lamb is described. The Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. This is really an idea drawn from the book of Daniel, although never exactly like that in Daniel. But it's going to show up again in chapter 19, and we've already seen it in chapter 1. Paul uses this one time in the book of 1 Timothy 6:15, Lord of Lords, King of Kings. But with him are those who are chosen and faithful. So this image of the risen Christ, the Lion of Judah, the Lamb, all the same thing with just a little bit different take each time. But this is contrasted with the beast of chapter 17. And you see the harlot riding the beast here. The beast was and is not, is going to his destruction, he says, in contrast to the one who was and is to come way back in chapter 1, or the one who is and who was and, like is now in chapter 11 has come. So the 7 heads are described as both 7 hills and mountains, and 7 kings. I'll say more about that, but the 10 horns are also 10 kings. And this is really, I think, a reference to the book of Daniel, chapter 7, the 10 horns and the 10 kings. So what's this idea of the 7 heads of the beast? It mentions 7 mountains or hills, and it seems to fit the city of Rome. This city was built on 7 hills. It was known that way in the ancient world. You can see in this map kind of a diagram of the city next to the Tiber River and the 7 hills that made it up, and the wall. This is a later wall, but that surrounded the city. And so we get 7 kings, and we get some additional information. He says 5 of them are fallen. We assume that means dead. 1 is, I assume that's the 6th one, and 1 has not yet come, but will come and remain but a short time. So some schemes add, as people try to interpret this, the 8th king, the beast itself. So there's actually 8 according to some interpretations. Well, who are these? Most schemes have started with Domitian and worked backwards. So here's a very common one. You end up with the 8th one, the one who's kind of not fully revealed yet, Domitian, but you can work back with the emperors, Titus, Vespasian, Nero, Claudius, Caligula, Tiberius, all the way to Augustus, who is the first true emperor of Rome. Julius Caesar sometimes is given that title, but he was never called emperor. He was the dictator and was assassinated, so he probably is not in view here. This is, kind of the one that I think probably comes into play. It doesn't take into account 3 quick succession emperors after the death of Nero that before Vespasian emerges. I think that period of chaos, none of those guys historically were really recognized as true emperors. Another one that you'll see, though, is that it starts with Caligula. I don't know why, though. I've never quite figured that one out. Why wouldn't you start with Augustus or even Tiberius? But Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Vespasian, Titus, Domitian, and then the next one is 7, and he doesn't know who that is. And eventually this becomes Nerva, who, I don't know, I don't see him as much of a fulfillment of prophecy. He wasn't a very important emperor. Well, what about the 10 horns? I mean, this is the kind of graphic you'll see on the internet, that you get these horns that talk and they're angry, but they're called kings too, but they haven't received their kingdoms according to the book. Many interpretations have been proposed, including that these are not human kings, but some kind of demonic powers. And this is where sometimes you get the idea of the princes of Persia, drawn from several sources. But I just have to say here, this may have been clear to John's original readers, but it seems to be lost to me today. I really don't, I'm not sure who these 10 horns and 10 kings are. So let's look at the beast. And again, I'm just giving you kind of a look at something you might find on the internet that equates the beast of Revelation with the royal family of England, and their very elaborate coat of arms. And this guy has like pulled everything out of it and tried to apply it to the book of Revelation. I get a kick out of these. So what about this beast? Well, there are several things that we need to keep in mind that go together here. Sometimes the beast is called the Antichrist, but Revelation never uses that term, the Antichrist. Antichrist comes in the book of 1 John and one time in 2 John, and he speaks there of Antichrist already being present and uses it in the plural. So Antichrist means something like false Christ. It's not, in Greek, not against Christ, but a substitute Christ. But another image for Paul in 2 Thessalonians, he talks about the man of perdition, or the man of lawlessness, that must come before Christ can come again. And then in the apocalyptic discourses of Jesus, he refers to the abomination of desolation. Now, we usually understand that as being the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, but some people equate that as an end times figure. And all of these get conflated in prophetic views, especially in dispensational premillennialism. Just say a little bit here about the myth of Nero Divivius, if I could say that right. You might look at the article there in the Lexham Bible Dictionary, which I wrote, by the way. This fear in among the ancient Romans that Nero was going to come back, that he wasn't really dead, that he had gone to gather an army in the east, and this was a live theory and a lot of fear because they didn't want Nero to come back. He was a bad dude, and that maybe some of that is coming into play here. I don't know. All of this is debatable, but there seems to be the sense, without any question in the Bible, of a final eschatological figure at the end of time, in the period when Christ is going to come again and final judgment that is powerful and evil. And what you see here is the beast is both a present and a past figure for the book of Revelation. He's been there before and he will come again, it says in verse 8. So this is the first thing the angel interpreter explains. This would have terrified the original readers. I think they were, especially get into this myth of Nero coming back. So the promise here is that when the beast wars against the Lamb, in other words, when the empire seeks to stomp out God's reign on earth, the Lamb and God would be victorious. This is what it says in verse 14. The empire may have its 7 plus 10 kings. Some of them are dead, some living, but the Lamb is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, and so he is going to conquer. So just a little bit of summary of chapter 17, and then I'm going to go quickly to chapter 18. The picture John gives her of the great whore is complex, and her main characteristics seem to be this like uncontrolled fornication. It's been suggested that the mounting of the beast, by the way, may refer to sexual activity. I don't know about that. But she's also continually drunk. She is ostentatious in her dress, and not in a good way. This is a bad connotation. And she uses this golden cup related to the image of Babylon in the book of Jeremiah, but there all the nations become drunk in Jeremiah. They become mad from drinking wine out of the cup. And the contents of the cup symbolizes the innocent blood of Jesus, holy and faithful ones, the ones who have endured and been faithful, but they have died for their faith. All of this is summed up to some degree in the name of mystery that's written, and it says it's on her forehead. I don't know what that means. Is it tattooed? Is it engraved? Is it like if she got one of those name tags that she stuck on there? She is Babylon, but it also makes her the mother of whores and the abominations of the earth. And so she symbolizes a lot of things here. It says in the text that her end is that they strip her, meaning humiliation. They cannibalize her, which I think means plundering and taking of her wealth. And they burn her, which is almost always in the Bible a symbol of judgment. One person has said at the final orgy, she serves as the hostess and the buffet table, so that she invites them and then they eat her. So just a little bit on chapter 18, I would encourage you to read this chapter. It's in poetry, usually placed in poetry in most translations. It's very reminiscent of oracles against various nations found in the Old Testament prophets. I think in chapter 18, he's probably most like an Old Testament prophet of any place in the book. So it's like, I've suggested some things here, but let me read a little bit from Isaiah chapter 13. Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the pride and glory of the Babylonians, will be overthrown by God, like Sodom and Gomorrah. This is the worst possible destruction. She will never be inhabited or lived in through all generations, and goes on for several more verses here. This is the kind of image that you get in chapter 18. So just a few notes here, a few comments on chapter 18. Including the merchants here is not a condemnation of business or commerce. It shows, though, that the commercial side of the Roman Empire was very powerful. It would collapse, though, without its military might. So you had commercialism that took over the commercial world in some ways of the Romans and the people living in Rome, and all the wealth flows back to Rome. But it's going to go away pretty quickly if they don't have the legions to back it up. I could say a lot more here, but this one reference here in verse 13 includes commerce in slaves and the souls of men. Literally, a human being sold as slaves. The King James Version translates it as slaves and souls of men. This is about as close to condemnation of slavery as to be found in the Bible, I think. You know, we look for condemnation of slavery, and they certainly did in the Civil War period, but this doesn't have a good thing to say about that. To buy and sell the souls of men is not a good thing. It's part of the evilness of the Roman system. And then this ascending smoke of the ruined city means that the defeat is felt in heaven itself. You know, in their worldview, heaven is above, and so the smoke goes all the way up to heaven. And then this pregnant question: what city was like this great city? And I'll just give you a foreshadowing. That's going to be answered in chapter 20 and 21. And then finally, this image of a millstone around and thrown into the sea. Very powerful metaphor for absolute destruction. They would understand that a millstone is unfloatable and unrecoverable. I mean, look at this guy. He's by an ancient millstone here that would have weighed, I don't know, maybe a ton or so. That thing gets dropped in the sea. You're not going to bring it back up in the ancient world, certainly. And so if you're the millstone thrown into the sea, you're not coming back for air. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. I'll have a few more comments in the next video about chapter 18, looking backwards from chapter 19, but thank you very much.